Hello, John, and hello, everybody. This is Chris Madrid French. I'm Director of Development at California Preservation Foundation, and right next to me is.
John Haber. I am the Field Services Director for CPF.
And welcome to our first program of 2022. We're very excited to welcome everybody back. I see we have 20 attendees in our room, and we are also broadcasting live to Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So if you have any comments, you can post those, and John is going to be monitoring those platforms, right, John?
That's right. Yeah. So if you have any questions, we do encourage you to use the Q&A box if you're in the room right now. So you just click on that Q&A symbol. In the Q&A box, you'll see any questions that pop up as an attendee. And if you see a question that you really want to be addressed during the Q&A session at the end, all you have to do is click the thumbs up symbol next to that Q&A button or next to the question that's being asked, and we will ask questions in the order that they're most requested. So you can use that thumbs up symbol. Our program today is an hour in length, part of our book club series. So we ask that you ask those questions early, so that we can take care of them as soon as we are able. And Chris, do you have anything else to add?
I do, John. So we do encourage you to chat while we're in the program so you can see your friends in the chat window. If you want to post where you're calling in from, once you post, people can see your name in the chat. And we can talk amongst yourselves. You can feel free to use that chat while we're in the book club. And if that window does bother you, you can push it to the side or minimize it. And I think I'm ready to get started. If you're new to our book clubs, you're not required to read the book. Really, this is just about uh, seeing more experiences and meeting more people that are in the preservation community. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Johnna Ireland. This is about Regarding Paul Williams. It's a photographer's view. It's by Angel City Press, published in 2020. It is $50 hardcover, 224 pages, and an incredible 200 plus images, which I can't believe that you did that, John. That's a lot of work. Janna is a this is a photographic exploration of the work of the first licensed Black photographer, uh, first licensed Black architect, excuse me, west of the Mississippi River. Known as Hollywood's architect, Paul Revere Williams was a Los Angeles native who built a very successful career as an architect decades before the civil rights movement, and his story is very compelling, and Janna is going to be going into that. She is exploring the work and legacy of Williams through this series of intimate black and white photographs. And it's more than just a book of architectural photographs. It's really the result of one artist's encounter with another artist, connecting across different generations within the same city. So, Jada, if you are there and ready, you could go ahead and turn on your camera. Welcome, Jana. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your generosity to explore some more of your work. If you want to go ahead, you can get started with your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today during lunchtime on this Thursday. I am here at home. I was supposed to be out in my studio working, but one of my children has been quarantined because his preschool class was exposed to COVID. So I do have a 4-year-old here with me today, and I'm hoping that I can get through this without him bursting in and sitting on my lap and trying to say hello to all of you. So as you just heard, I will be talking about my book. I'll be talking about my project about Paul Williams, which I've been working on for several years now. And I'm excited to take your questions and hear any thoughts about it. And I think the best thing to do is probably just to launch into it. So this is the introduction to my book, which seems like the most effective way to kind of organize my thoughts about this, because I've already done all of that organizing in writing the text. The essay is called The Architecture of an Icon. For the past several years, I've been photographing buildings designed by Paul Revere Williams, the legendary Los Angeles architect who practiced for 50 years and planned nearly 3,000 buildings. He was the first Black certified architect west of the Mississippi and the first Black member of the American Institute of Architects. In 2017, 37 years after his death, 44 years after his retirement, and 95 years after his induction to the American Institute of Architects, Williams became the first Black architect to win the AIA Gold Medal, one of the highest honors in the field of architecture. My study of Paul R. Williams began in the summer of 2016, when Barbara Bester, a renowned architect in her own right, asked if I would be interested in photographing some of his buildings. She had gotten my name from my former professor, the exceptional photographer James Welling. I jumped at the chance, even though Barbara was a stranger, Williams's name was only vaguely familiar, and my knowledge of architecture was limited to a brief elective unit on Greek columns in 6th grade. At its core, my work is about the expression of Black identity in American culture, and I felt an immediate connection to Williams's story. I'm not an architectural photographer or even a documentary photographer. Most of my photographs are fictional scenes that relate to my own experiences. In Milk and Honey, for example, my husband, children, and I play alternate reality versions of ourselves, carefully posed in my husband's grandfather's well-appointed mid-century house as though it were our own. When I said yes to Barbara that summer, I had no idea how to go about photographing a building, let alone dozens of them. What I did have was a 1-year-old son and a brand new full-time administrative job at USC. I was struggling to figure out how I was going to continue to fit art into my life. As busy as I already was, I was happy to have a new assignment. That initial email from Barbara came at exactly the right time. A few months later, pregnant with my second son, I began my Paul Williams work. The decision to photograph in black and white was intuitive, almost automatic, and not tied to any sense of nostalgia for bygone eras. I simply wanted to mute distractions like the color of a wall or carpet and draw attention instead to Williams's voluptuous curves and tidy lines. Most architectural photography is designed to sell a space. It asks, what purpose does a building or room serve? What does it look like as a whole? My goal was to create an experience of Williams's work that was about the feeling of living in his spaces and loving them. Williams thought about every little detail, and I felt that seeking out those details would be a fitting way to honor him. I searched for clues about Paul Williams and his buildings. Paul Revere Williams was born in 1894 to parents who moved from Memphis to Los Angeles for the promised curative properties of the climate. Both had tuberculosis, and both were dead before Williams's 5th birthday. Williams and his older brother ended up in separate foster homes. The woman who raised Paul Williams recognized his potential and nurtured his skills. His artistic talents distinguished him from his peers throughout his childhood, and he began his study of architecture as a teenager. When Williams was in high school, a teacher advised him that he'd never succeed as an architect. Black people wouldn't be able to afford to hire him, and white people wouldn't deign to. This conversation was a major event in Williams's young life. By his own account, it had never occurred to him that race would complicate his professional choices. At this moment, many young people would have abandoned their dream, as I very nearly did in a similar moment during my own high school career, 90 years later at the Philadelphia High School for Creative and Performing Arts. In my senior year, the teacher told me that I shouldn't apply to New York University, the school I'd fallen in love with, because it wasn't a place for people from humble beginnings. For a while, I believed him. The weight of a few words from an adult can be unbearable for a child. As Williams told it, his teacher seemed to think he was doing an unduly ambitious kid a favor by bringing him down to earth. I believe my own teacher thought he was doing the same. In both cases, the discouragement ultimately acted as a catalyst, not a deterrent. When I stopped being heartbroken, I was livid. I was 17 years old and at the top of my class. Who was this man to tell me I was overreaching? I sent in my application at the last minute and I went to NYU. Williams emerged from his own crisis with his commitment to architecture redoubled, his childlike ambition transformed into an adult's iron will to succeed. In I Am a Negro, his 1937 essay for American Magazine, Williams wrote of the drive that propelled him through the early years of his career. I wanted to vindicate every ability I had. I wanted to acquire new abilities. I wanted to prove that I, as an individual, deserved a place in the world. Williams went on to design municipal buildings, banks, churches, hospitals, motels, university halls, secondary schools, funeral homes, public housing projects, celebrity estates, and thousands of family homes. If you've ever spent an afternoon driving around Los Angeles, you've seen a Williams building or two. Williams' story is one I believe only could have taken place in Los Angeles. When he began his work as an architect in the 1910s, much of the Los Angeles we know today was a collection of dirt roads, farms, and oil fields. He officially opened his own office in 1923, right as the population of Los Angeles County reached 1 million. The booming city had three factors that allowed him to flourish: lots of money, lots of land, and a handful of wealthy white people, liberal or desperate enough to commission a young Black architect. Subtract any one of those factors, and his big story would shrink until it disappeared. Hancock Park provides a good example of how Williams's career developed. The neighborhood was established in the early 1920s while Williams was busy setting up his solo practice. He was given a chance to prove his worth with a series of commissions in this neighborhood, though he could not have built his own home there. Hancock Park was protected by a 50-year restrictive covenant, ensuring that the only non-white people who could call it home were live-in servants. This was true of many of the cities and neighborhoods where Williams did his early work. After years of violence, LA's restrictive covenants were a kinder, gentler way to keep neighborhoods white. With these genteel restrictions in place, homeowners could take comfort in the knowledge that the undesirable population would stay where it belonged. Word about Williams's impeccable work spread through Los Angeles's exclusive neighborhoods. In Hancock Park and Flint Ridge and Pasadena and Beverly Hills, one Williams home, and it was important to him that they be thought of as homes, not houses, became two, which became a dozen. By the time he retired in 1973, there were more than 2,000 Paul R. Williams homes in Southern California. Sometimes people who had seen his work and heard his name would come into his office only to be shocked to find that he was Black. Some turned and left, but others stayed out of politeness. For these people, Williams taught himself a brilliant trick. He learned how to draw upside down. A skittish prospective client could be drawn in by the magic of watching the home of their dreams appear on the table in front of them without the impropriety of sitting next to the Black architect. When I began my project, this and other stories about Williams's knack for turning indignities into triumphs intrigued me. How did it feel to design homes in neighborhoods where he wouldn't have been allowed to live? How did he unwind from the incredible stress of having to defer to people who would enjoy the benefits of his brilliance and labor without fully respecting him as a human being? When designing an intimate space for a client too prejudiced to shake his hand, did he view his work as a subversive act or something he had to do to survive? Williams's white contemporaries could find work by way of a signature style and the cult of personality. Williams had to work without ego, shifting to meet each client's demands. The result is a body of work that demonstrates incredible dexterity. Williams designed Monterey colonials and Tudor revivals and modernist bungalows. He could move deftly between historicists and contemporary styles, and often found clever ways to blend the new and the old. He believed in designing to precisely suit the needs of each client and built his reputation by giving even his smallest commissions his full attention. Williams also believed in making good architecture accessible to all. In two books published in the mid-1940s, The Small Home of Tomorrow and its follow-up, New Homes for Today, Williams offered the average American dreaming of building their ideal family home dozens of floor plans to consider. With simple but evocative names like Sunshine Manor, Shangri-La Cottage, The Country Gentleman, and the San Fernando, these plans were designed to be scaled up or down to meet the needs of different families. His work on public housing projects can be linked to his commitment to elevating his community and his belief that everyone deserves a dignified place to live. As the head of a team assembled by the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, Williams planned the Pueblo del Rio housing project in South LA in the early 1940s. In the early 1950s, Williams designed Watts's Nickerson Gardens, which remains the largest housing project in the West. Notably, Nickerson Gardens was a key site in both the Watts Rebellion in 1965 and the Watts Gang Truce, signed on April 28, 1992, the day before the officers who beat Rodney King were acquitted. The fates of Williams's structures vary. An untold number have been remodeled beyond recognition or destroyed. Most exist in a semi-altered state, some slowly run down by time, others well kept with subtle additions and updates. The homes he designed for Frank Sinatra and Dave Chasen were razed, but the First AME Church and the Founders Church of Religious Science are still serving their communities. His Broadway Federal Savings and Loan building burned down in 1992, but his Golden State Mutual Life Insurance building still stands, now the headquarters of the South Central Los Angeles Regional Center. The La Concha Motel in Las Vegas is gone, but its lobby still stands as the visitor center, of that city's neon museum. The long vacant Angelus Funeral Home building in South Central LA has been transformed into an affordable housing development called the Paul R. Williams Apartments. In early episodes of the AMC television show Fear the Walking Dead, Williams's Woodrow Wilson High School building appears as Paul R. Williams High School, a subtle nod from someone involved in the production. Williams's own Lafayette Square home is, at the time of this writing, and at the time I'm talking to you right now, in the process of being faithfully restored to its original glory. I'm happy to report that I'm not the only one doing work about Williams. The Paul R. Williams Project, run by the Memphis chapter of the AAA and the University of Memphis Art Museum, is currently at the forefront of Williams scholarship. Volunteers from the nonprofit organization US Modernist are diligently combing through records, debunking false claims made by dishonest or willfully ignorant real estate agents, hoping to use Williams's name to add value to their properties. Organizations like Esoteric and Save Iconic Architecture spread the word about Williams as part of greater efforts to honor the history of Los Angeles. Royal Kennedy Rogers and Kathy McCampbell Vance's documentary film, Hollywood's Architect, tells Williams' story in detail. The USC School of Architecture and the Getty Research Institute have recently acquired Williams's archives, opening the door for exciting new scholarship and research. And Williams's granddaughter, Karen Elise Hudson, has written books about her grandfather that are invaluable resources for those of us who treasure his work. The story of my work about Paul R. Williams is all tied up with my personal milestones. Learning to drive and learning Los Angeles by car, my pregnancy with my second child and lugging camera equipment and a big belly around strangers' homes, quitting my administrative job and beginning to teach photography, figuring out that I could be a decent mother and a committed artist at the same time. I learned a lot about myself doing this work, and the work continues. It may continue until I can no longer manage a camera. When I look at Williams's meticulous designs, I'm reminded that there's no hurry. It took Williams more than 50 years to complete his work. Why shouldn't it take me just as long to study it? So far, I've photographed over 24 Williams structures intimately and a few dozen more superficially from the street. The first building I photographed, a handsome mid-century ranch-style house in LA's View Park neighborhood, turned out not to have been designed by Paul Williams at all. I learned from the architect Frank Escher that the house was designed by Claude Coyne, a partner at Paul Williams and Associates. By then, View Park number 1, a dreamy picture of palm fronds leaning against a foggy plate glass window, had become the most widely distributed image from the project, appearing in Aperture and Harper's. Another photograph from the house had been printed in the Los Angeles Times. After much internal debate, I decided to keep the pictures from the View Park house in the body of work.
It's okay, Johnna. You can go take care of it, and we can. I can just talk to everybody for a minute. All right. So, hey, everybody. Johnna, like she said, she has her son at home. He's in quarantine. So we'll just give her a few minutes to get him settled down again. I hope you're really enjoying these photographs. And if you think of anything that you'd like to ask Johnna, this would be a good moment to post something in the Q&A box or also in the chat. I'm having a little tech trouble, and I wanted to let David know that I will definitely come by and stop and see you in Palm Springs. Oh, here she comes. All right. Go ahead, Johnna.
So sorry. He has no respect for any of the work that I do. Where was I? Okay, let's start in the next paragraph, see if that's close enough. I continue to be stunned by the generosity of those whose homes I visit. So many people have given me so much of their time and attention. I'm grateful for the hours of labor performed, invisible to me before my arrival. Floors scrubbed, mirrors polished, clutter tucked away. I'm thankful for the people I've come to know. The married pair of movie producers with a breathtaking art collection, the set of kindly Gen X lawyers with 3 kids and some amazing LA punk memorabilia, the college professor with a fascinating background in entertainment and politics, the granddaughter diligently tending to the family home. These people, house proud and justifiably so, welcomed me and let me see how they live. I spent 2.5 years patiently waiting to be granted access to the home Williams designed for himself and his wife, a sleek white international style house that resembles a futuristic riverboat run aground in the middle of Los Angeles. I gained entry to a house once owned by William Holden, later by Denzel Washington, when the current homeowner spied me through a window as I tried to take a clandestine picture from across the street. As soon as I said Paul Williams, his look of suspicion turned to one of warmth and understanding. I have scoured Zillow listings for Williams houses and cold called real estate agents. I've been introduced to property owners via friends of friends of friends. On several occasions, Williams homeowners read about my work somewhere, sought out my contact information, and invited me over. There are sites that turned out to be great disappointments and others that exceeded all expectation. There are also my white whale houses, beauties whose owners I unsuccessfully courted for months. I still hope to get to those someday. It's not the beauty of Williams's work that inspires me, though it does bring me a lot of pleasure. It's the thought of him grinding day after day in this city, patiently building his practice and proving his detractors wrong, that makes me return to his work. My photographs of Williams's buildings are as much a tribute to his labor and persistence as they are a tribute to his talent. I'm proud to live and work in Paul Williams's city. If Williams could become one of the most notable architects of the 20th century here, what can my children become in the 21st? This is a fascinating time to live in Los Angeles, though I suppose that can be said of any moment in the city's history. A city can change so fast. Tracking Williams's work is my way of making sense of this sprawling, fascinating place I call home. Paul Williams was a faithful citizen of Los Angeles who used his abundant gifts to change the face of the city. Los Angeles has changed without him and will continue to change in unknown ways, but his mark is indelible. Los Angeles is known as a city that likes to forget its history, but it will always remember Paul Revere Williams.
Thank you, Johnna. That was really moving, the way that you read that introduction over the videos or those scenes from your book. We are fine if you need to get up again, by the way. It's perfectly okay. Everybody in the chat is like, yeah, no problem.
I was going to say, we have a lot of sympathetic parents in the room, and they're all like, my kids are just like that.
Yeah, so if you need to get up, no problem. But first, I'll start off, and then John and I like to take turns with just asking some general questions. But again, if anyone is watching online or inside the Zoom room, if you have any questions, go ahead and post those to the Q&A box or in the chat boxes, and John and I will field those, and we can have this conversation with Johnna. I want to start about you really as a photographer. You talked about you say many times that you are not an architectural photographer, and I'm sure a lot of the people here would say, no, you are an architectural photographer by the mere fact that you are documenting architecture in a way that other people are not, and using your own vision. I wanted to ask you, you said that your work is about the expression of Black identity in American culture, and that the photos are fictional scenes that relate to your own experiences. And I thought maybe you could just go into that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. But that's something that has changed a little bit since I wrote the essay. So at the time I wrote this text, I was working on the Paul Williams work, and then I was also working on these kind of elaborate staged photographs with my family. So I would think in advance about what the costume should be and what the light should be and where everyone should be, and just sort of make these complicated tableaus. And that was sort of the other part of my work. But then, of course, I finished this text and submitted it to the publisher in February 2020, and we all know what happened in March 2020. So I was home with my family for about a year and a half. And I ended up making a lot of different kinds of work about my family. So making more candid pictures that are more about the way that we actually lived. So it's something that I think still fits in with my overall body of work, but is still sort of changing.
Am I asking a question now?
Oh, yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
okay. It's my turn, I guess. So, I see a lot of questions on social media as well, and just wanted to mention that the heritage documentation programs in PS, I posted it in the chat box. They posted that there's a whole HABS documentation as well, located at the Library of Congress. So we hope to see more of that, more documentation, um, both from Janna and from other architectural photographers who would like to preserve these places in memory. So, Janna, a question sort of arises in terms of the pride that homeowners have in their Williams homes.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, in your experience talking and photographing with a lot of these homeowners, what do they like most about Williams' work? What sort of resonates with them?
For a lot of people, what happened is they purchased the home and then they really learned who he was and began to take pride in the fact that they had one of these homes and were taking excellent care of it. And I think what people like the most about each house, it really varies. I mean, the whole idea is that so many of them are so different. So there's no one detail that comes up again and again as a favorite. There are multiple favorites, multiple favorite parts of every home, I would say.
And you mentioned that, Johnna, in the book a couple times, or also there's an essay in your book. Who is the other author of the essay?
Barbara Bester wrote one, and
Mhm.
Ingela Walhouse Ritter from Woodbury wrote one as well.
Right, I was reading that one too. So it was pointed out a couple of times that Paul Williams didn't just specialize in one type or one style, and then he worked in many styles. Do you think that part of that might have been because he was seemed like he was really hustling to get a lot of work, and there might have been some challenges with him, at least initially, to make his name in the world? Do you think part of that was him sort of just being open to any kind of commission
I
from
think
what
it
you
was
can see?
I think it was a combination of being really open and also just feeling the need to be able to do lots of different things. So and I don't know for sure, but I sense both genuine enthusiasm and a real desire to make sure that he can offer what someone's asking for.
Yeah, and to add to, Marcy on Facebook is saying that she really likes the circular stairway and circular window in the den, which is a common Williams feature I see in
Mhm.
a lot of homes. I noticed in your photos as well, just that beautiful curvilinear sort of staircase. I noticed in Williams' own home, he included, are those antelope, or do you know what sort of
I think
animals
they're
those?
antelope.
Wow, they were pretty incredible. Um, so I guess my question for you is, in terms of the type of work that Williams did, he's known for the residential work, right? Um,
Yes.
but then he also did a number of commercial and public spaces. And in your research and understanding of Williams, do you know which, buildings he was most proud of, or which ones he felt were sort of his mark on the world that he felt people should really appreciate?
Hmm. I do not know which ones were his favorites or which ones that he thought were the most impressive. One that don't know for sure, but that I would think that he's pretty proud of is his building for the First AME Church. It was the church he was a member of as a child, continued as a member throughout his life, and then was able to give them this design. So I'd imagine that that brought him a great amount of satisfaction. Again, not knowing, but if I had to guess, I would say that he would put being able to do that for his congregation high on his list.
I like that
Oh,
choice. We CPF held a workshop at the Great Western Mutual Life Insurance Company building, and it was such a stunning structure. Always imagined him saying, "Oh, this is my favorite," but you never know unless I guess there might be some historical documentation somewhere, or some quotes from him. Maybe somebody in the chat has some insight. But Chris, did you have a question?
That was
I
an
always
important one
do.
too. Yeah, I just wanted to say very quickly that the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Building was also something designed for his own community. So I would connect it to that same urge to give back and continue to be part of the community he came from.
Right.
John, I was going to ask you about your photography and your art. So you went to NYU, as you mentioned in your introduction. Then you went to UCLA, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how have you seen that your view of architecture changed from moving from New York City to Los Angeles? How has that changed your art or the way you see architecture?
I didn't think about architecture really at all when I lived in New York. It was kind of like moving through caverns all the time. It was just very, very vertical. And then I came here, and the experience of moving through the city is just very different. So instead of being underneath the city, you're moving through in a car and you're looking at the city stretched out in front of you. And I became more interested in the different ways that people lived, just looking at the kind of homes they designed for themselves, and just the way the different parts of the city were set up. And then through this project have just been drawn further and further into the world of Los Angeles architecture, which continues to intrigue me. And there's always exciting new things to learn and people to meet.
So I don't know if we're going to be moving into user questions yet or attendee questions. Chris, would you like me to ask one? I didn't know whether we were doing that yet, but I wanted to.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's see what other people have to ask.
I see a lot here in the Q&A box, so please do keep asking your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll keep an eye on them. But the first one I wanted to ask is really it's on the top of the list here. As far as you know, Janna, are there any definitive maps or lists or inventories? And then I'll add another question to that. Do you know of any Paul Williams tours that you would recommend? So either maps or inventories or tours.
Let me see if I can find the link. What is it called? There was recently a driving tour that people could take, and my brain is not working completely today. Oh goodness. No, that's not helpful. May I share my screen? Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
The Los Angeles Conservancy and NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, organized this Paul Revere Was Here tour. And I think that you can still take this self-guided driving tour with a map. The thing about, I'll put this link in the chat.
Oh, yeah,
One
that'd be
thing
great.
to note is that there are so many different types of buildings and so many buildings, and we're still kind of learning about new ones all the time. So I don't think that there is a definitive list yet. I'm hoping that that's something that comes out of people beginning to get into the Getty archive and really cataloging things in a systematic way.
That's
I
great.
want to talk about that too.
Yeah, I'll save that question for Chris. I won't take that one from her. But I just wanted to mention that the other day I was looking at Williams architecture, and I noticed that he had a hospital building all the way in Memphis, either Memphis or Nashville, I forget which, is somewhere in Tennessee, and I had no idea it existed. And so I'm sure there are these types of structures all over and he mainly was in California, I guess, but he probably did work outside of the state as well. So I would guess that they're constantly discovering new Williams structures in other places as well, right?
I think that that's true. I'll talk about a little more in a few minutes, but I'm doing some work on Williams's projects in Nevada. and the people who are helping me with the project out there keep turning up new information. And I think that that's probably true of a lot of places that he was connected to.
I have a question from the Q&A box from Daniel. Have Williams buildings ever appeared in film that you know of?
I mean, certainly. I'm trying to think of a good example.
You mentioned one in the book where they actually changed the name of the high school. I
Oh
thought
yeah,
that
in
was
Fear the Walking
interesting.
Dead, the Woodrow Wilson High School.
I can't think of any, and I watch a lot of films, but let's see.
The
Somebody
Beverly
says,
Hills Hotel is a great example that
oh, well,
he
yeah,
did build in addition to that, and that the writing on the side is his handwriting. So I would say that is an example that
that's pretty
appears in a lot of
prominent.
films. That's prominent and recognizable. And he worked on the master plan for the airport. The airport appears in lots and lots of films as an example. I'll try to think of some more.
Stephen is putting some in the chat. So there's that. But I do want to ask you real quick about the archives. You mentioned that. So there's a new am I thinking of the right place? Yes, I get mixed up with all the archives. Are the archives open? Can researchers visit those yet? Or are they still doing accessioning of the Williams archives?
I think that they are still working their way through. I don't know for sure, but what happened is that because of the pandemic, there was no pandemic safe way for them to get into the archives. So there was a long delay before they could actually begin opening up all of the tubes and cataloging everything. And it's my understanding that that process began pretty recently and that they're still working on it. But don't quote me on that. I'm not involved in what they're doing. I'm just kind of a fan of the work. So they're not emailing me with updates.
Okay, I have a trivia question that you may or may not know. If you don't, I'm sure it's fine, and the person asking the question will be fine. But I'm going to ask it anyways in case somebody in the chat box might know too. Is there any idea why he was called Paul Revere? What's the significance of his middle name?
I don't know, but I know that coming out of slavery for a lot of Black families, it was important to have names that spoke to their citizenship, to their right to belong, to their right to be in the country. My last name before I got married was Washington, so it was a name that is very much tied to the founding of this country and saying we belong here too. And I've always thought that naming him Paul Revere Williams was part of that, was part of the same thing, part of saying this child belongs here. He is an American citizen and should have all of the rights of an American citizen. I have no idea what his family would say, and his parents died when he was so young. I don't know if the story survived beyond that. That would be a question for his family, but that's my best guess.
I don't know if you mentioned this in your introduction, but Mr. Williams drew his plans backwards or upside down in order to not make his clients uncomfortable. Is that correct? I remember you mentioning this in an earlier presentation you gave. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, but that's kind of a well-known story about him, that he learned to draw upside down. So he could stay on his side of a desk and no one would have to come around and get too close to him. And it was, in addition to allowing them to stay separate, was just sort of an amazing thing that he could do. I mean, if you walk into someone's office and they can do that, you'll probably think this person is brilliant. This is amazing. And that would be absolutely right. But it was also, it was part of the showmanship of getting the work once people actually came into the door.
That's really testimony to how pervasive the racial prejudices were, I think, at the time, that, that you couldn't even sit next. Some people didn't even accept that kind of proximity. Anyways, I have a question from Dennis, who says, are you sharing your story with high school children, or do you also try to inspire and encourage and counter maybe any negative remarks that you might hear about? I read it, I think it was in your introduction, that only 2% of architects are Black. Do you ever come across this and try to encourage, new photographers, new architects when you're out?
I speak about it when I can. I've spoken about the work to high school students several times. I'm doing a lecture at a high school next month, I believe. He designed Marina Del Rey Middle School, and I have been trying forever to photograph it and also just kind of work with someone there to do a talk, but for some reason that kept falling through. I do think that, especially for students in Los Angeles, it's a pretty wonderful story that they should all know, whether or not I'm the one telling them.
I have a few questions related to somebody asked if you know if he had any buildings in the San Diego area or if you're aware of any.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, but getting down there has not been part of my research.
Um, and a lot of positive comments here in the questions. Even though they're not questions, I'll just sort of mention them. Everybody loved the storytelling through the images and your photos. And this is sort of my question for you in terms of your work. I know that you worked primarily in black and white, and you mentioned why you did that in the introduction. Um, Now, have you ever considered as a photographer, as an artist, exploring color as a medium, or do you think that detracts from the truthfulness or the actual sort of core of what that architecture is, or do you think it adds to it in certain with certain types of architecture?
It really depends on the project and the intentions. A couple of years ago, I photographed a house that he designed in Ojai as a special project for a foundation in Ojai, the Carolyn Glasso Bailey Foundation. And I photographed it in color. I just kind of wanted to try something different. And I liked the photographs, but I did end up wanting them to be more tied to the black and white photographs. But then if an architect approaches me and wants photographs of a building that they design and those photographs need to be useful for them, it makes sense for those to be in color. So maybe I'll shoot all of them in color and then have a few that are in black and white that are kind of just for me. It's really, there's no right or wrong answer. There's just what feels right to a particular artist at a particular time for whatever the project is.
Very interesting. We have another question from the Q&A. So are you good over there, Johnna? We have so many questions. I wanted to check in, make sure you're in there.
I'm doing very well.
Okay. What challenges did you face in capturing the essence of Williams' diverse architectural work, and what was most intriguing about it? So challenges, and what intrigued you about those challenges or about the work?
The initial challenge was figuring out what the work should look like or what I didn't want it to look like. And I figured out that what I really wanted to look at was details, was small parts of rooms. And then I had to be okay with it not being more traditional photography, with people looking at the book and or worrying, I guess, that people would look at the book or look at the body of work and say, well, I can't get a picture of what a particular building actually looks like. And then just sort of having to decide that I had to go for what I wanted and not make the work the way someone else might want to see it. And another, let's see, challenges, getting access to buildings was a bit of a challenge at the beginning. As the project moved further and further along, it became easier and easier to gain access to buildings. As I said in the text, there are some that I never quite managed to get into, but now that there are articles about the work and there's the book, there's something that I can show people so they know that it's legitimate. So it's made it really a lot simpler to gain access to places.
That's always the challenge that John and I talk about, that how do you get in and who do you have to know to get into some of these buildings. And I liked the way you called them white whales. I think you said buildings that you really want to get into, and it's on the top 10 list, the bucket list. I want to see the Johnna bucket list. So I have another question here from the Q&A. What are the barriers in your mind in making architecture and preservation more accessible and open to Black people today?
I think one challenge is making it clear that there is value in the spaces that Black people live in. that there are beautiful things in Black neighborhoods. A photographer I know named Lee Bay photographs in Chicago. He photographs the south side of Chicago where he grew up. And the whole idea is there's all of this significant architecture here that people aren't looking at and people aren't recognizing. So I want people in the community to see value in this work. And I want people outside of the community to know that it's there and to appreciate it and to bring it into the larger conversation about architecture in Chicago, architecture in the United States, and so on and so on. There's an Instagram account called Hood Mid-Century Modern that goes to a lot of neighborhoods in Los Angeles, neighborhoods in Detroit, Atlanta, to Black neighborhoods all over the United States, and is looking at architecture there. And that is an account that I think has taken off with a lot of people and has made them begin to look at their neighborhoods in a different way. And in terms of the barriers to looking at it in the first place, I mean, what can I say? I'm trying to think of how, I don't know. That's something I would have to think about some more, what I would describe as a barrier. But I would say that the big thing is just not people outside of the communities not recognizing the value is a big barrier.
That's a discussion that we've been having, which I think a lot of it might go to integrity. So this notion of integrity that we're looking at, CPF is looking at, the best way to describe it is people say it doesn't look historic. That's just a way that I find that some communities, their architecture is marginalized because people see it and they're like, that doesn't look historic because maybe it's not in good condition, or maybe it has, stewardship has been not as maintained over the years. And so I think that could also be a barrier. We're getting a lot of interesting comments in the chat about this topic. I wanted to mention, since we're sort of talking about this, Janna, that there will be a session in Palm Springs at Modernism Week. And I see some of our Modernism Week friends are actually on this webinar. So I lost my words there for a minute. So this is going to be, I could put the link in the chat. It's called Stories Untold, Black Modernist in Southern California. It is scheduled for February 21st. I believe it starts at 1:30 to 5. It's a 3-part lecture. And I didn't know if you were going to be there, Janna, maybe not because of your young children, but Paul Williams is going to be part of part 2. And he's going to be talked about. We have Gail Kennard, who's the daughter of Robert Kennard, will be there. And actually, some of us from CPF will be there representing the organization. So I'm going to put the link in the chat if anyone is interested in attending Modernism Week. John, do you want to read another question from the Q&A?
Yeah, and a few came in, so I don't know which one to pick first, but the one that I don't pick, I'll send to you, Chris, and you can take it on. But maybe I'll ask the one about photography, because I'm a photographer myself, amateur. But I have a question from Erica. And it's a longer question, so bear with me here. But she wants to see if you can discuss your use of lighting when photographing the interiors of Williams buildings. And she said, it seems like you've relied on natural light quite a bit, and how that contributes to the ethereal atmosphere of the images and accentuates the exquisite curves in that architectural detailing. And she was also struck by the inclusion of images of demolished buildings. So she said, she also commented that your photographs are gorgeous, by the way, and thank you for publishing this book.
Thank you, Erica. Okay, before I answer Erica's question, Angela, you asked about the Instagram account, and I just posted a link in the chat.
Great.
In terms of the lighting, I began by bringing lights, and I had this whole plan that I was going to really stage everything carefully. And then when I got to the first house, I thought that the way this actually is so beautiful. I don't want to impose anything on it. I want to look at what's actually here. And I continued to bring the lights for a little while just in case. And then I ended up feeling like I really wanted to look at the lighting that was actually there. something that black and white does, which wasn't not the reason that I did it, but which is helpful, is that it means that you don't have to worry about color temperature. So there are times when I was relying on natural light, but there are other times when maybe I would have to turn on a light in a room or a lamp, where there would be mixed light sources. And the black and white kind of allows all of those to read in a more natural way. And you're not thinking about the different colors and the different light sources. So it is whatever is there. That's the lighting that we're looking at. And that was also another way to, in my mind, distinguish it from the other work that I was doing. I wanted it to feel, not just look different to other people, but feel different to me while I was doing it.
Thank you for that. I have a question about the Williams family from Dennis, who says, I attended a couple of lectures by Karen Hudson, granddaughter. Is she still active?
She is still active. I happen to know that she is working on some projects. I don't have any details, but I think if you keep an eye out for her name, that it will probably be appearing pretty soon with some new work.
And going back to your comment about making sure that the Black community recognizes their own the exceptional work of people like Williams within their own community, there was a question about whether you know of any Black Americans, either artists, musicians, business leaders, anybody who commissioned Paul Williams for architecture.
The Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Building is a great example. Several of the homes that I photographed were for Black families. There were churches in the Black community. There are buildings on Howard University's campus. So those are all some examples.
Great, thank you.
John, what else do we have in the Q&A? I can't see
sorry.
the Q&A because of a glitch in the system.
I'm covering as many as I can here. So following on the Golden State Mutual Life building, I referred to it as the Great Western Mutual Life. I'm not sure why earlier, but following on that, the question was, do you know anything about the current status of the building and if the company is still in business? I understand that it's now taken over, occupied by a nonprofit. Is that right?
The South Central Los Angeles Regional Center, at least the last time I checked.
Great. It's in great condition. When I was there in 2018, they did a wonderful job of rehabbing it. A lot of the original features in the theater are still there. Did you take, I wasn't able to see, were there photographs in your slides that showed the theater of that structure?
There were not. I photographed the outside, but no one ever called me back about photographing the inside.
Oh, it's incredible. There's some gigantic murals on each side of the proscenium that are just wonderful, and it's a wonderful theater to have a workshop in, let me tell you. And
Yes,
so
I've been inside, but didn't take any pictures.
Oh, maybe somebody will invite you back, I'm sure. And okay, so another question about how many books were written about, I'm not sure if you know this, but there was a question if you know of any particular books that you would recommend that were written about Paul Williams' life and his work.
I would recommend Karen Hudson's books. There are a few of those. Some of, I believe at this time they are out of print, but I think that her big book about him might be coming back into print. I don't know for sure. You can track down copies. Angel City Press, my publisher, recently published another book about his work. Let me see if I can find that to add to the chat. And that is yet another thing that I'm hoping comes out of. Actually, there are some people from Angel City Press here. Can Jim or Scott, can you put the link in there? What was I going to say? I completely forgot what I was about to say about the book. I'm sorry. Oh, that one thing I'm hoping comes out of the Getty archive is more people writing books. I think there will be more books very soon. Right now, there aren't that many.
So there's room. Anyone who's watching, get writing. Let's get some more books out there. We have a question from Dick. He says, by chance, do you know who gave Mr. Williams his first big break?
I do know, and the name is escaping me right now, but one thing he did was work for lots of different kinds of architects. So, for example, there was a landscape architect who took him on and was
Wilbur
very
Cook?
helpful in his
Is it
career.
Wilbur Cook?
I believe it was Cook. And then the name that I'm trying to think of is, oh gosh, it was a wealthy man who hired him to design a particular house. And that was a big
Reginald
break.
Johnson?
Johnson?
Steven's posting these in the chat, so I guess he's coaching me.
Okay, okay,
We
thank
got a
you.
very active chat window, Johnna. This is one of the most active chat windows we've ever had. But those are some names that have come up in the chat are Wilbur Cook, landscape architect, and then perhaps Reginald Johnson.
And there were some architectural competitions that he won as well, which I think helped him get a good start.
And then he was finally reached the AIA status. What is that? Not fellow. He's the first, was he the first African-American fellow in the AIA?
He was the first member, and then he became a fellow later, and then there was the gold medal.
The gold medal as well.
After his death.
Wonderful to have that recognition. I think John wanted to ask you what you have coming next, right, John? We were wondering, so we can post some links in the chat window.
Yeah, I think it's notable that two first with the AIA gold medal. One was Julia Morgan, the first woman architect, and Paul Williams, the first Black architect to be in to receive the gold medal, and they're both Californians. So that says you about it tells you a lot about California. I think we have a question this is our closing question for you. And we'd like, I'm sure everybody in the room is really excited.
EL Cord.
Oh, yeah.
EL Cord was another one. And I'll get more into EL Cord in a minute. Sorry.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll ask you about that first, then we'll close out with a closing question for you.
Oh, I was just when talking about what I'm working on next, I can mention EL Cord. We can get to it later.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's our question for you. So what's next? Everybody wants to hear here.
The big thing that I'm working on right now is I got a fellowship from the Nevada Museum of Art. I'll show my screen. And I am working on photographing some of his buildings there, including a house that he designed for EL Cord. He built something for EL Cord here in Los Angeles, and then Cord later hired him to design this house out in Nevada. So that will be part of this show, which will open in Reno at the Nevada Museum of Art in July, and will run through October, and then we'll travel to Las Vegas.
That's incredible. That's wonderful news. So everyone can see your work. Explain to people who are watching, what is that first image that you showed at the top of your page there, in case people aren't familiar with it?
This is the lobby of the La Concha Motel, which was picked up and moved when the motel closed, and now sits at the Neon Museum and is the entrance.
That was an incredible save. And so do you feel like, this will be the last question, do you feel that your work is benefits historic preservation because you're getting the word out there?
I hope so. I mean, what happened with me and Paul Williams is that I started doing the work right around the same time. There was stuff going on behind the scenes to get the work moved to get his work moved to the Getty, and then the documentary about his life and work, Hollywood's Architect, which had been in the works for years before I began my work, finally came out after I was working on it and before my book came out. So I feel as though my work is part of this big group of things that are all happening at once. And I hope that it is helpful in terms of preservation, but I don't want to give myself too much credit. I think there are lots of other people who are doing the work.
And
well, yeah, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, as someone who's been to the Neon Museum of Art in Las Vegas, I will say it's the absolute best entrance for any museum I've ever been in. So kudos to Mr. Williams for designing one of my favorite museum entrances as well, even though it wasn't intended as such, essentially in the first place. Now I left. Chris, did you want to mention something before I?
Nope, I think we're ready to wrap up, John.
Okay, so to wrap up, we just wanted to remind people that in the chat box, you'll see a link to an evaluation form just to let Janna and us know how we all did today and also what you really want to see in future programs. We're trying to get the moderator of Hood Century Modern on, so if he's on right now, or I think it's a group of people, then we hope that they could join us. So anything else, Chris?
Yes, I wanted to thank Johnna. We really appreciate your time and sharing your personal stories with everyone. And I can tell that our participants really appreciated it as well because we have so many warm comments in the chat. And I hope we can see more work from you soon. And thank you very much for everything that you've done.
Thank you.